everyone, and welcome to your first session with us. Just so that we have everything cleared up at the start, we are a group of scientists, mostly coming from a biological background, but some with statistics, and then some obviously with a purely computational background. And our study group works a little different in that we work through an entire chapter in a book called Python for Biologists. The link to it is at the bottom. And we then attempt the exercises at the end of the book. And then when we come together, we basically come together to discuss any issues that we had with the exercises at the back of that specific chapter, and then to do any additional exercises if there's time. Usually we don't spend that much time going through the notes in the book unless there were specific issues that came up. The notes are also available on our GitHub, which is also posted at the bottom of this video. So if you want to join us, the best thing to do would be to read through the appropriate chapter. We're on chapter 1 now of the Python for Biologists, and then attempt the exercises at the back, and then you should be able to follow what's happening and then join us for any additional exercises. So I want to start today with working with numbers and strings, and do a little bit of background theory. So in Python, there's a distinction between numbers and text. And the distinction becomes clear even at the start when you try and print anything to the screen, in that a number is just typed differently. So a number, for example, in this case over here, you will see those numbers are typed plain. It's intuitive. You can see 1 plus 5. You can even intuitively do the sum in your head and know what will be printed to screen. But with strings, they need to be surrounded by quotes, and strings are a bunch of text characters, so they usually are alphabetical characters, but they can be things such as underscores, commas, anything like that will be seen as anything non-number is usually seen as a text character. And there are other data types as well, but we'll get to that in a bit. But for now, that's the distinction between the two. So one of the main things is, firstly, yes, it looks different. There are no quotation marks around numbers, and you can perform basic math, or all kinds of math actually, on number characters. So in this case, for example, you will see here just 1 plus 5. There's no equal to, and then you just type. So we're working in Jupyter at the moment, and again, Jupyter needs to be installed. The link to that is also pasted at the bottom, but you can work from any other IDE. If you're working in Jupyter, then you would have to go Control Enter. Some use Shift Enter, but you can't just enter. If you just press Enter, it will create a new line. And you will see that the answer over there is 6, as you would have guessed. Something else that needs to be mentioned is that Python is very strict on spaces because they mean something in Python. So in this case, for example, if you write 1 plus 5 and you put plus 3 on a new line, depending on which IDE you're using, it will either give you an error, or it will only execute or only give you the result of the last line. So in this case, it will ignore the first bit and it will just print 3, because plus 3 is 3. It sees that as 0 plus 3, for example. If you, for example, for the purpose of readability, want to create multiple lines, for example, if this entire line over here is full and you want to make it readable enough and you want to put the next line on a new line, then you can use brackets or parentheses to surround your statement in this case, and this will then execute as one entire statement, as if they are all on the same line. So in this case, you will see the answer is 9. Now, Python also has what is called an escape character, and this also tells Python, ignore what is directly following this character, but then continue with whatever is following that. So in this case, it will ignore this blank space here, and then it will continue with what is happening on the next line, and that will actually execute exactly the same way as the first one. But you have to be careful with this escape character, because there are what is known as special characters in Python, and they also mean something. So two of the things that you will probably use often would be this /n, which is for new line, and /t, which is for tab. There are other ones like /r, but I don't think you'll use that much unless you, for example, producing games and working with web development. But the /n and /t will be ones that you use often. So if you try and use an escape character, for example, here, and you put a /n over there, now obviously this would need to be surrounded by your quotation marks, then that might not mean what you think it means. So be careful that you do know that there are special characters, so that when you execute your script or your program, it doesn't do something that you didn't intend it to do. Okay, so there are also other operations, your usual ones in Python. I'm going to try and make this a bit bigger. Okay, so you have, for example, your addition, subtraction, all of these ones. I will explain the modulo a little further down. You also have floor, and then to the power of. Now, some of these only work with numbers, but some of them work with strings as well. But Python does have what is known as libraries, which assists you for if you want to do any additional, more complicated, for example, mathematical applications. Python comes with some standard built-in. I think most programming languages come with special, with built-in what is known as functions and methods that you can use. Those are the ones that they know most people will be using. And we look at one of those directly after this. But then there are also special ones that they know not everybody are going to use. So why complicate and make the Python program run with all of those things in it that will possibly slow it down or make it longer to load? So they allow you to import libraries that you need. And obviously within that specific library, you will find all the things that you would think would be related to it. So for example, if you're going to go to a library that is called a food library, for example, you would expect that you would find something like stove, blender, spoon, things like that within that library. So for example, you can import a library that allows you to do statistical analysis. Then you would find things such as doing the mean, doing variance, doing all sorts of analysis like correlation, for example. But those aren't loaded with Python. As soon as you open it up, you would have to import that. So let's go to this first character over here, division. That looks familiar. So this would do exactly what you think it would do, or not. Let's have a look. Okay, so if you do 10, this again, you don't put an equal sign over there, and this is seen as numbers. Although this may seem intuitive, you will see why exactly you need to make a distinction between this, and be careful about quotes and no quotes. So you see 10 divided by 4 over there. If I print it, I see 2.5. Now this is called a decimal number, and Python makes a distinction between, when it comes to numbers, it makes a distinction between decimal numbers and integers as well, just as we do in math. I'll get into that in a bit as well. But just remember, this is a float. It's a decimal number. So the floor character that we see over here, this is 2 slashes. That is actually exactly the same as this. Now, if you do math a lot, you would wonder why this, you would say this is 2.5, but in some cases you might want to see that as only an integer and you want it to round up. But you will see in this case, it just types it as 2.4. In this case, when you have what is known as the floor, you basically, the formal definition is the largest integer that is not greater than the result of the division That to me is not a simple definition. So for me, the simplest way to say it is rounding down. So you have your 10 floor 4, and your answer there is 2. So in other words, it rounded the answer down to 2. But in some cases, you would want to round it up. And you would think that something that is also built into that called round would be able to give you that answer. But it turns out not. I learned this the hard way. It also rounds it down. So here comes the libraries that I was talking about earlier.